welcome to this week's RuneScape podcast. I'm Mod Matty, the podcast monkey, and with me to discuss River of Blood today, I have...
Mod Stu, senior content developer.
And Mod Orion, content developer.
Both of the Guardians team.
Indeed.
Well, we've released River of Blood this week, and it's gone down really well, really impressed. When we were working on the quest, what was the aim of the quest? Why were we releasing another one of the Myreque quests?
So River of Blood is the conclusion to the Myreque series. It's a 7-part series, 9 if you include Priest in Peril and Nature Spirit. So it's got a very long legacy to it, and our aim was to bring that 5th Age story to a close.
Is that our longest quest series so far?
I believe that Plague's End beats that one.
Right,
the
okay.
series.
It's fairly close though, isn't it? Yeah. And it's a Grandmaster quest.
That's right, yes.
So there's been some discussion on the forums and on Reddit about why we said it as a Grandmaster quest.
Well, the tiers of difficulty of our quests are determined by the skill and quest requirements.
Yeah.
Strictly. So although we have some Grandmasters that are rather short but very heavy on combat, we have other ones that take a very long time to complete, but they might have moderate difficulty. In terms of strict classification, it's the skill requirements that determine whether it's Grandmaster or Master.
Right, so because it's at the end of the chain and it's got lots of skill requirements.
A couple of that are 80 or above, yeah.
Yeah, it puts it into the Grandmaster stratosphere, so to speak.
Exactly.
And it's also got a lot of lore as well built into it. So although combat levels probably not as high as some of the other Grandmasters. Yeah,
it was certainly a challenging one to work on because so many plot threads have been woven into the series over the course of all those quests, and we need to try and bring all that to a fitting conclusion.
Okay. Well, now we're going to start getting into the really spoilery bits because so far we've avoided any of that. So if you haven't played the quest and don't want to know what happens, then you probably don't want to listen any further. And so we go on to the rewards. I understand some of the rewards are quite tasty from this Mod Orion.
Yes, okay, so the players have pretty much fallen in love with the new Sun Spear, or at least the reformed Sun Spear.
Right.
So we've hacked off the top of Drakan's blade. We've got a Blisterwood shaft, and we've put a Wolfbane dagger on the end of it, and we've got this double-ended spear. Now, this weapon is not only augmentable,
right,
it's morphable, so you can switch it from a melee spear to a magic staff to a ranged javelin. It's also degradable. It's tier 78, two-handed. So there's all of these different functions that it fulfills.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's absolutely amazing for Iron Men as well, because obviously they're somewhat limited, at least in a sensible manner, to what weapons they can use.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect weapon for them. It's got a 600k reclaim cost.
Right.
So it's really good for Invention.
Yeah.
Definitely a good way to train Invention and Slayer at the same time. Especially if you have a Via task as well, because it tears through them.
I understand that there's a trick involving ravening ghouls and using it as well. Okay,
so the ravenous ghouls is related to the blood essences.
Right.
But they're also not undead as well. So what happens is the Sun Spear has extra effects on the likes of Vias and werewolves.
Right, okay.
Etc. We don't class ghouls as undead, so Sun Spear doesn't have an extra effect on those.
Right.
But if the player wears a blood essence in their pocket slot, which obviously they can only get from completing the quest, so the Ravenous Ghouls have been out for 2 weeks and no one's really known what this extra effect is.
Yeah.
They become very aggressive and they will stack up on you, and they're very good combat XP in that regard. They work very similar to how players train in the Abyss, with the Abyssal Lurkers and Leeches and stuff. Now, obviously, it's still probably worth bringing the Halberd there, because you can hit through the Ravenous Ghouls.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the spear, while it's probably long enough to be a halberd, it functions as a spear, so it doesn't have that two-tile.
Doesn't have that extra reach.
Indeed.
Okay. So tell me about blood essences as well.
Okay, so blood essences...
This is a really sweet piece.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. They each have different niches to fill. So, for example, if you're the type of player that uses overloads and maxes out on buffs when you go bossing, then a few of them will not be of use.
Right, okay.
They are mid to high level ranged, but they were designed to be cheap.
Okay.
They were designed to be accessible. Once you've completed the quest, I mean, the quest requirements themselves are not overly high. We've got some 80s, that's fine. But once you've gotten to this level and accessed the blood essences, you should still find use for them, at least 1 or 2, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah.
So there are 6 types. We've got the vampiric blood essence, which works in the same way as the vampirism aura and the scrimshaw, in the sense that melee attacks will restore health depending on how much damage you deal.
Yeah.
It's kind of an offensive and defensive. You got the heals based upon damage that you do.
Yeah.
Then we've got the penance blood essence, which works exactly the same as the penance aura. It will deal extra damage to you. I believe the numbers are 8% extra damage for 2% extra prayer, based on the damage that you receive.
Okay.
The Aegis blood essence is effectively a shield. It will proc every so often and negate some potential damage.
Okay.
Now you won't see that, or at least how much damage was negated, unless you activate it and use the ultra version of the blood essence, which I'll explain shortly. I'll carry on through the list. So we've got the reflecting blood essence, which does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
If you receive damage, it doesn't negate any of that damage, but it does reflect that damage back at your opponent. The activated version does 50%, and the regular version will reflect 5% of the damage back. And that's over about 7 or 8 seconds as well, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
So it's not just one hit. We have the Berserker blood essence, which works similarly to overloads, except for a shorter duration. They can be activated for 20 seconds, so your stats get boosted up to, I believe it's 133 if you are maxed.
Yeah.
And that's with potions and such. That is the maximum level you can get. Other than that, I think it goes up to 117 or 118 without potions, which is still pretty cool.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you use overloads all the time for everything, then it's probably not worth using it because it doesn't stack with overloads. That would be very, very overpowered. That is the bottom line on that. You've heard it here.
Yeah, we're not making it work with overloads, despite how many times some people are asking us on the forums.
Indeed. And finally, we've got the tireless blood essence, and a lot of players surmised that this would be run speed, which, to be honest, wouldn't be that useful. It's actually adrenaline.
Okay.
So it will give you a static plus 15% adrenaline as soon as you use it.
Right.
Its passive effect, which took players a good day or so to find out how it worked, was that you have a chance when you kill an NPC to receive adrenaline based on the HP, the health points of that NPC.
Right, okay.
So if you are farming hard, you'll get a fair bit extra adrenaline and you will notice it. And it has been balanced accordingly. It doesn't sound like much because I believe it's 1% adrenaline per 2,500 HP. So it doesn't sound much on its own, but if you are farming and you're killing...
It does stack up quite quickly.
Oh, wow, yeah, it does. You will get a full adrenaline bar, something like 10% faster than usual, and that makes a big deal.
It
makes a big difference. So the 2 different effects with the blood essences, we have a passive effect. That's like a minor version of their main function. And we have an activate effect, which is the kind of right click activate, and it will do its larger, more impressive. Exactly. It's its special, And generally you can say that the activated version is about, on average, 10 times better, but you're limited to doing it once per minute.
Right, okay.
An example of that would be that the Aegis blood essence, which would normally negate some damage, will negate 50% of the next hit that you take. So it's really useful for some boss fights where you're expecting a good
good wallop.
Exactly. You can put your shields up and brace for impact.
It's got some good usability then.
Yeah, I think they're very niche, but the fact that they're quite cheap. And also, one thing I'd like to mention as well, I don't know if players realise this yet, is that they are overchargeable. When you create a blood essence, it starts with 1,000 charges. You use 1 charge per passive activation.
Right.
And 50 charges for an activated version. You can actually use congealed blood on the blood essences after you've created them to charge them up to 5,000 total charges.
Right, okay.
It certainly makes them last a fair bit longer, and because they don't degrade to dust, players will eventually find this out and it will become more apparent.
Cool. So, given that we've now got to the end of this series, is that the end of Vampire Quest now then?
It's the end of the Myreque quest series. So that resistance group fighting against the vampires in the 5th Age, that storyline is concluded. We've built the memorial to the Myreque, and they're pretty much disbanded. Their purpose has been served. But in terms of the vampires and the other creatures of Morytania, we'd certainly like to do more with that environment and those characters in the 6th Age.
Yeah.
It's not something we plan to do anytime soon. It's not on any release schedules. We'll see what players want as their priorities for future updates. We certainly would like to focus more on doing other 5th Age series in the interim.
Yeah, because Morytania is now... 5th Age is done for Morytania. Yep. It's now up to date. So there are other 5th Age stories we want to catch up on first. Probably.
Exactly.
So, given all those changes, what's going to happen in Morytania next?
We'll have to wait and see. At this stage, we've had various story threads that we wanted to resolve, and there's a few dangling plot threads that can be explored further in the 6th Age. Things like the Splinter Group, for example, which you actually wrote the book for. We're very grateful to you for that.
Thank you.
So that was one of the things that we could have tied up in a neat bow, but we wanted to see if we could discuss that further in a 6th Age environment. So that's one thing that's still dangling. There's the new political power play that's been established from Safflan as an heir apparent to the vampires, and you've got the Icene have come back with their representative, and there's an uneasy truce, how that may potentially play. But at this stage, that's really a storyline to be considered in the future, and that's not something we plan to address anytime soon.
And what about the werewolves? The poor werewolves.
So werewolves did have some representation in the quest. Not as many as Chaos Lupus would like, I'm sure.
Funny enough, that was one of the people I saw this question being asked from.
Yeah, I had a feeling it would be. Yes, he's very passionate. Yes, werewolf quests are also something that could potentially happen in Morytania in the future. I know he's certainly keen on it. I'd be interested to see how many other players would be and whether that's a appropriate use of resources.
So one of the things that had a great response was the hallucinogen sequence.
Oh, yes.
The post-poisoning sequence. So that entire graphical sweep as you run up through Castle Drakan, how did that come about?
So that was quite fun to develop. So Mod Rowley decided that we should be poisoned by the weird.
Right.
And experience some kind of maybe fourth wall breaking, slightly weird effects for the player to experience. So I spent a morning kind of prototyping camera effects. So to those of you who were somewhat nauseated by, I apologize, but not really. That was the intention.
Yeah, the intention there was to make people feel discomforted, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's why that camera does that sway and that pulse.
Exactly. It's supposed to feel weird and disorientating. So a quick funny story from development. I purposely made it really bad so that it would freak out most of the QA team. And I made over 50% of the QA team feel nauseated or ill, and they hated me for a day. Mission accomplished, guys.
So we toned it back down from that.
Yes. Yeah, we adjusted it accordingly. And it's only really bad for the first part of the hallucinations.
Right,
so
okay.
Observant players will notice that you do calm down. The camera pulsing specifically calms down as you go up the castle.
Yeah.
It's like it's wearing off, and certain things will trigger it. The color shading appears and disappears depending on things that you do in the castle. So, again, spoilers, you've already gotten this far. When you kill the skeletal hellhound hallucinations in the Castle Drakan courtyard, and that's after you've just spoken to Safflan, you have to kill them to get past a barrier. That barrier is, again, all of this is hallucinations. You are practically fighting against your own mind at this point. And that was one of the better ways we could convey that, was to just bring back past memories of the Myreque series, such as the Hellhounds and Vanstrom and Drakan, things that you know are already dead and you have to fight them once again. things like Van Strom's Bloodveld called Harold up on the first floor of Drakan. So you've got Vertida's Holy Water, and you're currently hallucinating, and everything is that kind of film noir, Sin City color grading of black and white and red, very bloody and vampiric in essence anyway. And as soon as you throw the holy water on Harold, your hallucination dissipates and your color grading goes back to normal.
Yeah.
The pulsating calms down. Then all of a sudden you walk through and you see the Grand Exchange. Hang on, what the hell is the Grand Exchange doing in Castle Drakan?
Yeah.
The color grading appears again. You feel nauseous again. You go up to the next floor. You blow up the Stone of Jazz. You chop up a blisterwood tree and see that its stump is spurting blood into the air.
Yeah.
Everything's a bit weird. Everything's not quite right. Yeah, that was really fun to implement. We had a few other ideas. We wanted to include some weird teleport animations, and maybe actually have Vias, the Venators, going through the windows as they smash.
Right.
Those of you who rushed through the quest, you silly people, you might not have noticed that we had all of the Myreque heads on a bookshelf on the first floor. And you can talk to them and they give you small hints about the quest. So we noticed that a few people got stuck on the Stone of Jazz part because the fire pit is not very visible.
Yeah.
Again, these are all kind of, we've tested these and decided that they were okay. We wanted you to spend a good 5 minutes in that room searching around for a solution.
Trying to figure the right solution.
It's a puzzle at the end of the day. And it's very similar to the older Myreque quests, and even quite similar to the original Elf City quests as well, in the sense that, there's a few of these items in a room. How do you get to the next part?
So one of the things that's come out of the quest is there's a whole bunch of people requesting they can have the filter all the time. I assume that's technically difficult.
It's not technically difficult at all. It's actually quite easy to achieve. The issue is implementing it in a way that is sensible and safe, and also so that we don't overwrite other effects that are intended. So feel free to go and try this, but there's the Sun and Night Stones, I believe, from God Wars Dungeon. Mm-hmm. If you use that in hallucination areas, you do get odd effects in that you overwrite various hallucination effects. And we haven't put anything in place to manage that yet. I think something in the future would be to have an environment color grading management system, and so that all of the developers could plug into that, and it would certainly make it more streamlined. Okay. It's possible.
So another one of the common questions is, what didn't you get to include?
Well, we started by designing everything that we wanted to do. Yeah. It was a glorious and massive amount of objectives and plot threads and characters that were included. We would be recruiting mercenaries from Temple Trekking. Dr. Harlow, even from the Vampire Slayer quest, would be there.
All over the place.
You'd have your final words with the nature spirits, and you'd have parts going into Port Phasmatis, and you'd be luring Araxites out because apparently vampires are terrified of spiders and getting them to sabotage via camps. And you'd be able to go into the ruins of the Icene Castle and explore there. We'd rework every environment graphically. If we had 6 months to a year to do all that, it would be an amazing thing. In practice, though, there is only so much we can do in a quest.
Was there anything you didn't get to include, Mod Orion, that you were hoping to?
Not overly, because when I joined the team, the storyline had mainly been fleshed out.
Because this is your first big project with the team, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And then swiftly moving on to Eastern Lands afterwards. I joined about halfway through the project, and a lot of the objectives had been planned out. The storyline was already there. Yeah. And I got given a lot of the tasks within this project that were very self-contained. Yeah. So I could bring my experience from previous jobs, like the God books, for example, onto Blood Essences and Sunspear. And then I got to try my hand at a bit of the quest with the hallucinations, the Castle Drakan sequence, and stuff like that. So I think I got to include everything that I wanted to, but my scope was smaller.
Right. Okay.
So that's probably why.
Okay. There were some hallucinogens, some hallucinations rather.
Yes.
That you wanted to include that you had to not include, but
yeah, indeed.
You got most of it in then.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, if I had the chance, more and more weeks on hallucinations, which would have probably been a bad use of time.
Yeah.
I would have teleported the player around the world and done very silly things. But then it could also verge on confusing for the player.
Okay. So you might have lost some of the narrative drive through the castle.
Yeah, indeed. It's very difficult to stay within the confines of sense and nonsense.
Yeah.
While hallucinating.
Okay. And my last question for you both: what's your favourite part?
So I really enjoyed the mausoleum. I really enjoyed the particle effects and the cutscene that we got there, the blue and purple explosions.
Yeah.
You kind of pour this liquid into the salve. Yeah, that was visually really appealing to me. Yeah. And also it felt rewarding. It felt like this is the part where I'm going to mess things up for Vinescula. Yeah.
My favourite part was definitely in the first act when you're restoring the salve barrier. That section was intended to be a callback to the earlier quests in the series, which were less handholdy, where you're exploring around Morytania. You're given a very vague thing you're trying to resolve, but it's down to you to remember where certain things are and puzzle it out for yourself. You're unveiling the history of Morytania. You're digging around with strange mechanisms and old books and things, and trying to work it out for yourself. There was
real exploratory archaeology kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something that Mod Titan did very well. I wanted to ensure that was well represented.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much. It's a great quest. And look forward to seeing what you do next. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.